This is a WGBH News special presentation. The final Boston mayoral debate between incumbent Mayor Marty Walsh and City Councilor Tito Jackson. Live from our Brighton studio, here are moderators Jim Braude and Margery Eagan.
Good evening and welcome to everyone in our audience here at WGBH and to everyone who's watching or listening at home on 89.7 or WGBHnews.org. It's 2 weeks to Election Day, and we hope the next 60 minutes will help you make your choice for Mayor of Boston.
We intend to cover a lot of ground, and the only thing we can tell you about the format is that there isn't one. No opening statement, no closing, no time limits, though long-windedness will be discouraged. Feel free to talk to each other. We actually encourage that, gentlemen. And since we're asking our studio audience not to applaud during the debate, you at home can do whatever you choose. Why don't we take a minute to give Mayor Walsh and Councilor Jackson a hand right now? Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to it. Margery, it's all yours.
So, Mayor Walsh, let's start with you. A WGBH poll last week was a landslide when people were asked what was the biggest issue in Boston. It was affordable housing. I know you and Councilor Jackson have had a lot of discussion about what affordable housing means, what's affordable to whom, and how much affordable housing you've built. But 2/3 of people in Boston, 2/3 are renting already, and a lot of them are being priced out of the market. So I wonder what you can do for those people now before they have to pack up and move to Fitchburg.
Well, let me first of all thank you both for hosting tonight, and
Sure.
thank WGBH for putting this debate on tonight. And I want to thank Councilor Jackson as well for being here with us tonight. You know, one of the first things we did when I got elected mayor of the city of Boston was to look at housing in the city of Boston, and we put together a housing plan in October of 2014 because we noticed that there was all kinds of issues of housing in the Allston-Brighton area. You had housing being taken by college students and jacking up prices in those areas. In Mission Hill, we weren't having enough senior housing. We had a housing crisis and people being priced out of the city back in 2014 and before that. And what we did was we put together an extensive plan to create 53,000 units of new housing in all different categories: low-income housing, moderate workforce housing, senior housing, and create more opportunities for on-campus housing in the city of Boston. And in the last 3 years, we've worked really hard at that to build more housing. And we have 22,000 units permitted in the city of Boston, of which almost 9,000 of those units are low-income, moderate-income units of housing. We've changed the inclusionary development policy in the city of Boston, where we're able to accept $57 more additional million this year alone to go into affordable housing. We've invested over the last 3 years $100 million into affordable housing, and we constantly this wasn't being built before. We weren't seeing private developers building moderate, low-income housing in the past, and we're seeing in that area today. We've seen a bit of a stabilization in some rents around the city of Boston, but we still have more work to do. And in order to keep the city equitable for folks, I think there's two things. In the poll, it talked about housing being the #1 issue. And the second issue is economic development and creating jobs for people. So we have to continue, not just build housing, but we have to continue to build wealth and close that income inequality gap throughout the entire city of Boston. This has to be a city for all people. It can't be a city for a few people.
Councilor Jackson, every poll says, even with what we've done, affordable housing is still the big problem in the city.
Well, it's because the city of Boston is building way more luxury housing than actual affordable housing under the Walsh administration. In a Jackson administration, day one, we will set about taking apart the BRA, which is a promise that Mayor Walsh actually made. Instead, he just rebranded it and called it the BPDA for $600,000. In my administration and in our administration, what we will do is we will take apart the BRA. We will put in place, and understand the issue with the BRA is that it is not a transparent organization. It's not a city agency, and the money that it collects does not go back to the city operating budget. So there's not transparency there. In my administration, we would dismantle it. We would make sure that we have a city department for planning, separate from development, and it will be people-centric. In addition, on public land, we will make sure that there is public good done. On public land, 1/3 low income, 1/3 moderate income, and 1/3 of that would actually be for market rate.
But Councilor Jackson and Mayor Walsh, can we return to the people who are here already that Margery mentioned? I mean, let me pose one thing. New York, San Francisco, LA, 3 high expense places like this, they all have some rent capping limitations. As you both know, in 1994, when people statewide repealed rent control, people of Boston voted to keep it. Should we look to some sort of rent control, to keep rents under wraps for people who already have a unit?
In those three cities you're talking about, there's also large state investment in those properties. New York's building skyscrapers with investment from the state that's offsetting the cost to be able to build low-income housing. And I think what we've done in the city of Boston, just to set the record straight here a little bit, we don't build luxury housing. Developers do. Private developers build luxury housing in the city of Boston.
But, Mr. Mayor,
but let me just, we've been able to take that money from luxury housing and be able to take $57 million this year and put it into affordable housing. And we also were able to support this year the Community Preservation Act, or last year, that they tried in 2001 that didn't happen. So what we're doing in the city of Boston is building housing. And if you talk to a lot of the advocates, they understand that we're pushing, we're using city-owned land to build housing, and we're going to continue to build housing.
How about for the people who are here already? Would you consider some sort of rent control for those who are here?
I'm not sure if rent control would work in the city of Boston.
What do you think?
How about you?
What do you
So
think?
yes, we should consider it, and we also should go further and deal with some of the things that are happening right now. In Cambridge, they have now raised their inclusionary development policy, which means how much affordable housing you have to build if you build 10 units or more. They've raised it to 20%. In the Jackson administration, we would raise it to 25%. In the Jackson administration, we would also, for the people who are here, and you're asking a direct question, so I want to answer your direct question, and we would take $5 million and create flexible vouchers, which could begin to deal with folks who are going to have their rents raised. That is something that is happening in Washington, D.C. already, and it's something that the council has put forward, but this administration has not taken it up. We have an opportunity.
Make sense for you?
No,
or no?
it won't work.
Why not?
We went to 18%. We went to 18%, and in 2018 we're going to look at that number again. And I just want to talk a little bit about the voucher program. We have 11,000 vouchers right now in the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority. We have 13,000 people living in apartments in the city of Boston by the Boston Housing Authority, and the federal government is starting to divest from that. So we have to continue to work not just with moderate low-income housing, building it. Those are the poorest of the poor people living in our housing authority, families earning $17,000 or less. So we made an investment in the housing authority last year with the city budget for the first time ever. So as we think about housing, we also have to preserve the housing that we have. So when we talk about new programs like that, we have to think about the new programs. And if we took that $5 million and put it into permanent housing, we'd be able to build 600 units of housing where people could live forever, not $5 million for vouchers for 1 year.
You know, one of the things you talked about, Councilor Jackson, is the fact that low-income housing is not affordable to a lot of low-income people because there's such a diversity of incomes in the city of Boston. So what would you do about that?
Well, first we have to talk about, and I'd love to hear from Mayor Walsh what he defines as affordable in Boston, because the issue that we have is we know that affordable generally in Boston means from $70,000 to $120,000 for families of four. What we know in Boston, though, is that 50% of people make $35,000 or less. So the housing that Mayor Walsh is building that he says is affordable is not affordable for the people who actually need it. In addition, 20% of the housing actually 20% of people in Boston are actually paying over 50% of their income for their housing.
Let's hold it there. Isn't he raising a legitimate question? When you have a citywide average like this, people who are lower income in certain communities are getting priced out by these affordability standards.
We're building units, and we've set records for the last 4 years of building.
So why is everybody complaining in every one of these polls in huge numbers?
Because it's a real concern. Because in our city, we've had an increase of 30,000 people move in the last 4 years. So the supply, we need to increase the supply. The demand is so high in the city of Boston, and when you put supply on the market, what it does, it brings down the demand, lowers the rents in certain areas of the city of Boston, something we have to do. And also, my administration, and Sheila Dillon, who's the chief of housing for the city of Boston, every housing expert in the country knows her. She's one of the best. We're certainly focused on this issue every single day.
I've got to hold it there if I can. You mentioned that the city's got to be for everybody. I want to talk about issues of race, Councilor, starting with you. At the last debate a couple of weeks ago in Roxbury, you said you were speaking about racial strife at Boston Latin, and here's your quote. The mayor actually didn't believe that Black Lives Mattered, is what you said. Pretty incendiary rhetoric that might be divisive. You actually think Marty Walsh doesn't believe Black Lives Matter, or you just think that when it came to Boston Latin, he didn't do what you thought he should have done under the circumstances?
The Department of Justice said he didn't do what he should have done in that regard. Young people stepped up. I actually sent a letter to his administration to let him know the march prior to that, that something was happening at Boston Latin School. And so he did nothing until it became a crisis and young people were harmed.
So does he not believe that Black Lives Matter?
You know what?
You said it, not me.
Well, you know what the issue is? Whether or not he believes it or not, it's about his actions. And that's what this administration has had an issue with. Programs, studies, you're going to study, you're going to put forward an RFP to do a study on a disparity study. That doesn't make sense. In the city of Boston, 0.5% of contracts that the city puts out actually go to businesses owned by people of color.
Is he insensitive on issues of race?
Well, I think the insensitivity, I think, is when you dismiss the largest, the NAACP, which is one of the largest civil rights organizations. They put out a report and you say, I respectfully disagree. It's 218 pages, and you're not actually taking into account what's going on there. In Boston, a white family is worth $247,500. A black family is worth $8. In my district alone, from Back Bay to Roxbury, there's a 33-year difference in life expectancy. People in Roxbury live only to 58.9 versus 91.9 in Back Bay. The real issue and the proof is actually in the pudding. In the Boston Public Schools, the achievement gap is actually widening and it's not contracting. And he's cut the Boston Public Schools $140 million in 4 years.
Again, because he's, excuse me, but I'm quoting you, because he doesn't think Black Lives Matter. You said it, Councilor. I didn't say it. Or because he's just making the wrong decisions.
He's making the wrong decisions.
Okay. I want to follow up on this NAACP. We did a poll here of likely Boston voters. Is Boston a city where the hopes and dreams of people like you can be realized? 56% of whites strongly agreed, only 33% of blacks. In that NAACP report, quoting the city statistics, black and Latino unemployment twice that of whites. The achievement gap, as Councilor Jackson said, is not improved when you have Latinos and blacks on one hand, Asians and whites on the other. And the NAACP gave you an overall D, indicating no real change on economic development for blacks and Hispanics. So despite your efforts, and I know you've made a mayor, have you failed when it comes to representing blacks and Latinos in the city?
No, not at all. That report, really, when you look at the baseline of that report, that goes back, that's a generational report.
But are any of the things I said wrong?
That's failed policies by the federal government. That's failed policies by the state government. That's failed policies by the city of Boston. Since I've been mayor and before I was mayor, I've never backed away on the question of race and making sure that we work on income inequality and racism in our city of Boston. We've made great gains in our city in a lot of different ways. We've made great gains in our own hiring within City Hall. We've made great gains in our educational system. The achievement gap actually is not getting wider. It's actually closing.
So they're wrong when they said that?
Well, I say they're wrong. I think some of the information in that was not accurate.
Okay.
You know, it's not just a. Go ahead.
But the issue is, and this becomes an issue of a monologue versus a dialogue. Mayor Walsh is not listening to the Boston branch NAACP. He also didn't listen to in the Boston Public Schools when 4,000 students walked out. He didn't listen to what they were saying when they said that they were being underfunded. In this regard, you need to listen to what is actually happening. And what happened at the Latin School, what's happening in terms of businesses, and also what's happening in streets and communities and neighborhoods around the city of Boston. You have to acknowledge and listen to what's going on.
I'd like to talk about the record of the Walsh administration over the last 4 years when it comes to race and race issues. Race dialogues. We had the first town hall meeting in the history of the city of Boston where a mayor had a conversation about race in the city of Boston. That's the bigger issue here in the city. We had a conversation there. We talked about, the councilor mentioned that 0.5% of people of color are getting city-owned contracts. We did an executive order last year to change that, because that was something that was going on in the city of Boston. It hadn't been changed in a long time. We actually made a change to that to open up the doors for people of color and women and veterans to be able to access more city contracts, as well as working with the state to change state policy there. We're working on hiring in the City of Boston School Department with our teachers of color. 50% of the teachers we've hired since I've been mayor of the City of Boston have been teachers of color.
But you won't deny that there are two Bostons,
no,
Mr. Mayor, even if you deny some of the statistics.
I won't deny that there are definitely issues we have to deal with, and we deal with them every single day, whether it's education, whether it's housing, whether it's economic development, whether it's policing, whatever it is. Again, we're talking about generational issues here that nobody has ever tackled. My administration is tackling these issues, and we're going to continue to tackle these issues. I could go point by point in everything the councilor said and rebut him on all that, but I'm not going to do that tonight.
Well, can we move on to public safety? Is that all right with everybody here? Because you both agree that we need to have more police officers of color. Now, the mayor has said, you both agree on that, and the mayor has said that he's been limited by the civil service exam and by veterans preference, and he's tried to work around that through the cadet program. So if you want to get policemen on the force, policewomen on the force that are people of color faster, do you get rid of veterans preference, or do you get rid of the civil service exam? And if you don't, what's your plan?
Well, I believe that we should modify part of the civil service. I believe that you should have to live in Boston longer. But I think if Mayor Walsh truly wants to build relationships in those communities and to get more people, then he would work with MAMLEO, which is the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. They've indicated to me that they have not had a connected relationship. Those are the people that you want out recruiting for a very good and a very honorable job. In addition, Mayor Walsh would direct the commissioner to stop using the biased hair test. They have a hair test that actually gives false positives for short, curly hair. The city of Boston has spent over $1 million defending this test that is no longer used with the TSA. We have to make sure that people feel safe, but also I think we should go further around police accountability and ensure that we have body-worn cameras for every single police officer, and that we have a civilian review board so that we continue to build trust in neighborhoods and communities, so we can elevate the rate of arrest that we have in Boston relative to incidents where there's a non-fatal shooting. 4% is the clearance rate for non-fatal shootings. The police department says now it's 15%, but that's
20% actually.
That's still very, very poor in neighborhoods and communities.
Before we get to body
cameras,
cameras, I want to talk about body cameras, but before we get to that, you want a chance to...
Let's talk about what's happened in the police department in the last 4 years. First of all, the most diverse command staff in the history of the police department. 4 years ago, when running for mayor of Boston, people were saying that the leadership of the police department needs to reflect the community, and it didn't. It does today. Superintendent Gross is the first person, African-American person, ever to hold the position of chief of the police department. Lisa Holmes is the superintendent of the training at our academy. The class that's in right now in the police department, 49% of those people are people of color. In the class right now of 130 officers, 70% of the folks that are in our cadets are kids of color. As a matter of fact, I asked the counselor to give me a bunch of names for that, and he gave me one. So an opportunity to be able to advance and give folks in Roxbury the opportunity to get onto the police department. We're working on that. President Obama 2 years ago recognized Boston as a model of community policing. What we're doing out there is building up relationships. You know, when we see the issues around the country, that's something, and I say this often, I start my morning talking to Commissioner Evans every morning, and generally throughout the day, it's either him or Chief Gross that I'm speaking to. And it's about building trust in the community, and we have been building trust in the community. And when people criticize the police department for things that aren't true, I mean, it's bothering, because we go out there every single day. When there's a shooting in the streets of Boston, you know, when there's a homicide in the streets of Boston, two mothers lose their loved ones that day. The person that gets killed and the person who pulls the trigger. And that's a problem. We have to continue to work to bring the shootings down. And we're also working on a national level to reduce the guns in our streets. We're taking 3,000 guns off the streets of Boston in the last 3 years. It's easy to talk about all these fancy things you want to do, but it comes down to actually working in the streets and creating opportunities for young people.
Let's talk about a non-fancy thing. Roughly 66%, am I right about that, of current officers are white. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, I believe that's the number
Okay,
that we saw from the city. You talk about these other programs, even if they're successful, and they're iffy, you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We're talking about a long time before a majority-minority city has a majority-minority police force. And so I know the cadet thing is well-intended. Is there a big idea out there that can get us from here to where you both say you want to be, other than this, I would argue, well-intended but iffy one?
Well, I think the only way you can do that is if you eliminate civil service altogether, and the veterans have veterans preference because they go and fight for the country. And one thing that we've tried to do through my Office of Veteran Services is work with our Commissioner Giselle Sterling to try and recruit veterans of color to take the police and fire exam so they have the same advantage that other people do. And that's something that we're working on as well, to try and have people come into the city of Boston.
Is it true you only made one recommendation, as the mayor said a minute ago, Councilor?
I did make a recommendation.
One recommendation?
Yes, I did.
Why not more?
Because that was a young person who had come to our office and made the connection. But under Mayor Walsh, we do need to note that 75% of the officers hired under him have been white officers. 90% of firefighters hired have been white white firefighters. We have to make sure that we have a city workforce, in particular in public safety, that is a reflection of folks in the city of Boston. And that is not currently happening. And also, he did not address the fact that he has not worked with Ma'am Leo and other organizations to ensure that they are bringing in people who they have connections with to recruit in the city of Boston.
Actually, I have a breakfast with Larry Ellison from Ma'am Leo on Thursday. He called me, reached out to the office, sit down and talk. And I have been talking to Ma'am Leo over the last 4 years. So that's not accurate.
Let's talk about police body cameras. I was stunned to learn what I learned this week. We did a poll. 78% of people in Boston want police body cameras. 90% of African Americans want police body cameras. Of the 25 largest cities in the country, we're one of the only ones who don't have police body cameras, which I did not know. We had the program, the pilot program ended in September, but now we have another 9 months of studying.
No, it's not 9 months.
It's 9 months?
No, it's not 9 months.
When do you think
we did a 1 year. First of all, let me just clarify. The 25 cities in America that have body cameras, not every officer in those. Some of those have selected officers in them.
That's right.
A very small number.
But now no officer has them here, correct?
No officer has them in Boston right now. So what we're doing is we did a year-long study of a pilot program. And we'll have the Northeastern universities working on the findings of what the information was. The feedback I've received so far is there's been good response on the body cameras. There was great interaction in the community. There was a couple suggestions where there was incidents in the neighborhood that actually police officers called for somebody with a body camera to come. So that's all positive that we've heard. And once the pilot program, once the study comes back to us, we make the decision what the next step is.
But the decision might be not to have them, correct?
And it could be to have them.
So, but when do you think that might happen?
I think December is when they're asking to bring it back. I want them to bring it back before December. We're analyzing information from a year ago. I mean, there was a study in the New York Times, a report in the New York Times the other day that talked about how body cameras aren't working in some cities across America. It's not doing the job. But we want to be able to see to make sure if you're going to make that investment, you want to make sure that it's going to work. And on top of it, it's not about a body camera. It's about building trust in a community. So you can wear all the cameras you want, but if a person of color, if a young black kid still doesn't feel safe walking down the street because a police officer approaches them, that's where the problems are.
Can we ask one more question?
Not in the body camera.
You know, Councilor, if I may, just for a second, I'm thinking back at your appearances on our radio show.
Yes.
I don't think you've missed an opportunity, despite some of the criticisms you just leveled at the mayor about this, where you didn't say how terrific you thought the Boston police force was. Is that not a fair statement?
I've never disregarded the work that the Boston Police Department has done, and I thank the men and women of the Boston Police Department who do that job every day. But we can get better, and we can get better because the Boston Police Department has been sued for $38 million in the past 7 years. And so it is critical that we move forward and actually deal with this issue of transparency and accountability when it comes to body cameras.
Weren't almost all those $38 million in settlements prior to the Walsh administration?
And you know what? Those dollars were taken away from the Boston Public Schools. Those dollars were taken away from all kinds of things in the city of Boston. Understand, this is a mayor who has studied a proven technology relative to making some connectivity here. The Boston Police Department doesn't have dash cams. We had a show called Cops that was on for over 20 years, and it's now canceled, and they still don't have dash cams. How is it that we live in a leading technology state? We're talking about bringing huge companies here that do technology, and we won't actually use those technologies in Boston. But this also is about paralysis by analysis. He needs to step forward and actually take a leadership role on this, and that's what we've seen out of this mayor. Timid, tepid leadership, and that's why we don't have body cams in Boston.
Of course, respond to that briefly, please, Mr. Mayor.
Violent crimes down our city 6%. Property crime down our city 14%. Arrests in our city over the last 3 years down nearly 30%. The police department is doing something right, working with all of the program, all of the outside community groups as well to bring down arrests. We're not going to solve the issues of Boston and the violence in our city by locking everyone up. We need to do is continue to build programs. We can argue and talk about body cameras, and I can get criticized all day for not doing my job. But I know the programs that we put in place, whether it's My Brother's Keeper or Operation Exit or Building Pathways, it's about creating opportunities for young people in the streets of Boston. Many of those young people dropped out of school. They dropped out of high school. They didn't have opportunities. And when they don't have opportunities, what do? They go to the street. That's all they know. We have to continue to create opportunities. And the way you move Boston forward is by creating opportunities for people.
We got to hold it. Speaking of opportunities, I'm sorry, Councilor, you mentioned jobs and those things. The city submitted, as we all know, a bid for Amazon. You have criticized the mayor for providing $25 million in tax incentives to GE to draw 800 jobs here, saying, and this is a quote from you, too high on incentives. And the other night at the Roxbury debate, you said, quote, Amazon gets nothing but a smile and a pat on the back. So a couple of questions, Councilor. If $25 million was too much, what would have been the right amount? And number two, do you actually believe the city should just say no to any tax incentives to draw 50,000 jobs to the region? Or do you believe that we're better off without having Amazon here?
Well, the issue is this. We have a mayor who fast-tracks bids for Amazon, Olympics, Grand Prix, but he slow-tracks changes to education and fully funding the Boston public schools. We're going to get there. But when it comes to Amazon.com, as I noted before, I do not believe that we should put forward financial incentives.
Nothing.
Because, no, we should
Zero.
not. Because, and I did these deals. I helped bring Google to the state of Massachusetts. I helped bring Microsoft to the state and expanding their presence here. We were able to bring them here based on the workforce that we have, based on the locale that we have relative to transportation. Why did we put forward a helicopter pad when we are the closest? And understand, this is a $12 million helicopter pad that would have been funded by the state as well as the city. We actually have the closest commute from the airport to the center of the city of Boston.
So I want to be clear, if I can.
Amazon should want to come here. They should want to come to the city of Boston.
So just clear, no tax incentives for Amazon. And so when you said the GE tax incentives were too high, your view is there should have been nothing there too? Is that your position?
Well, what we also see now, fast forward to to where we are
is
right now.
Is that a yes or no?
Well, no, we should not have given GE
Nothing.
$25 million,
Nothing.
especially because they're now talking about laying people off. That was a bet that the city of Boston lost.
Did you not vote? Did you not support tax incentives, property tax relief, multi-million-dollar tax relief for what is called the Fenway Center development just a few years ago? I read a portion of a speech that you did in favor of that. Is your let's put it this way, is your position across the board no tax incentives to encourage anybody to come here? Is that where you are?
I believe that the tax incentives given to General Electric were too much. I'm not saying that they never should be used, but when it came to GE, a company that was walking away from the incentives, well, actually, that they were given in Connecticut, and a company that poisoned the Housatonic River in Pittsfield and still owes over $600 million.
But zero for Amazon. I just want to be clear. Zero for Amazon.
Yeah, zero. I stick with that.
Mr. Mayor, on the Amazon thing, there's no numbers.
We didn't write a check to General Electric. And General Electric coming to the city of Boston is an incredible opportunity for the city of Boston, not just having General Electric world headquarters in our city, but the other types of companies and talent that attracts here. So we're not going to turn companies like that away. And the $25 million incentive wasn't a check. It was up to $25 million because they were doing a development in an area of the Four Point Gym area that was dilapidated. And they also made an investment the day they announced, $25 million investment into our educational system. And they made a $15 million investment into our job training programs in Boston, in the greater Boston area. And they also made a $10 million into healthcare. So, you know, not turning a company like General Electric away as a city like Boston would be completely the wrong thing to do. And also, just for the record, I mean, I know what the council talks about what we're giving away here in the city of Boston. But when he was working for economic development in the Patrick administration, they gave plenty of tax credits away back then. So I just think that, you know, when you look at tax credits, I don't believe that we should give the store away. Amazon coming to the city of Boston, we did not put in our bid any type of incentive. There's a $7 billion incentive from New Jersey, and there's a $500 million incentive from Worcester. You know, we're going to see, if we get to the next round, we will talk about what incentives potentially we're going to...
tell the public what those incentives are going to be before...
Of course you
will. Before you offer them?
Yes, because you need the help of the state on this. It has to be a collaboration with the city and the state, because you're talking about what we're going to get, what the city of Boston will get was real estate property tax in that deal, and what the state will get was income tax. And that's a far bigger number, by the way, than what we will receive in property tax in the city of Boston.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Jackson mentioned the Olympics and your effort there. On reflection, anything you would have done differently other than not calling the opposition 10 people on Twitter? And did the failure of that effort inform in any way how you're approaching Amazon?
In some ways, yes. I mean, we learned a lot from the Olympics. We learned a lot as far as how to move forward. It was pretty early in the administration, and I was the person who actually pulled out of the bid, and I was very clear from the very beginning that I was not going to mortgage the future of the city away in the city of Boston. And what I mean by that, people that might not understand it, the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee wanted me to sign a document that said if there was cost overruns or if the Olympics got canceled for any reason, the cost would be borne by the city, the host community, which would have been the city of Boston. So we decided not to do that. So we pulled out of the Olympics. What came of that? We started to talk more about planning. Imagine Boston 2030. We talked about Whitehead Circle and the growth of Whitehead Circle. Our housing plan took off. And in the Olympics conversation, we were going to build the Olympic Village and then convert that afterwards to housing. So when we put the bid in for Amazon, we started looking at transportation. We started looking at the investments that we've made as a city in transportation and the investments that need to be made on the state level in transportation. And we talked about that in the bid. We talked about housing.
A secret bid, by the way, which the public didn't see,
Amazon's
which is different.
Amazon's not secret.
But no.
But you didn't release
I'm talking
it before.
about the Olympics.
I'm talking about Amazon.
Okay.
I'm talking, and it was put together. The city of Boston wasn't putting the bid together. It was being put together by private outside people. If we were putting the bid together as a city, it would have been an open, transparent bid from the very beginning because we had the bid.
Okay, let's hope you brought up the Olympics thing. Are you comfortable with what the mayor had to
I'm
say?
absolutely not comfortable.
Why not?
Because he is misremembering what actually happened here. I was the person on the council, the only person on the council to step forward in the subpoena of the Olympic documents and actually make sure that we had transparency. So he had already signed the Olympic joinder. And so the issue here is that we have a mayor who signed off on the future of the city of Boston. What we found out was that the $9 billion that they said it was going to cost, it was actually $12 billion. And Mayor Walsh disregarded, the reason why we have 10 people on Twitter is because he was disregarding people who vote in the city of Boston and who care about these issues. And in addition, we wasted a whole year on this issue, and it wasn't until the beginning, end of last year, beginning of this year, that we had a build BPS plan. Mayor Walsh has expedited the Olympics, has expedited the Grand Prix, has expedited GE. You know what? We're tired of corporations being put forward and fast-tracked as we see our young people and our classrooms taking playing second fiddle in this administration.
Briefly?
In the last 4 years, we've added 60,000 new jobs to the economy in the city of Boston. Our population has increased by 30,000. We have more level 1 and level 2 schools than any other time in the history of our city. We have a graduation rate in our high schools that's the highest in the history of our city. We have a AAA bond rating for 4 consecutive years, first time in the history of our city. So there's a lot of good things here in the city of Boston. And when you want to continue to harp on the Olympics and IndyCar, it doesn't work. The Olympic conversation was a conversation, and we took what was worked in that conversation and we'll put into planning in the city of Boston, look at the future of the city of Boston, much like they did in New York City, in looking at planning. So we're looking at the planning aspect of it. And the IndyCar was a race around the waterfront for 3 days. And what it cost the taxpayers of Boston, those two? Zero.
Well, let's talk about education.
No, it is costing the taxpayers money. Because actually, 2 of the people who were involved in that are now federally indicted. And those individuals are making $250,000 a year. We also do need to have a real conversation about where funding is actually going in the city of Boston. And we have to put that on the table because we have an administration that has federal indictments and dollars that are flowing. And Mayor Walsh continues to pay 2 individuals who are federally indicted. Interestingly, when he talks about police officers, if you're a police officer in the city of Boston, you do not get paid once you are indicted. This is happening at a time when the Boston public schools are getting cut.
That's not worthy to response because all the information that the council just talked about is all false.
But you are paying those 2 people, are you not?
Yes, they're getting paid. They're on leave.
Let's move to education.
And why are they getting paid?
Because in the United States of America, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Okay, let's move on to education, okay? Because I know you want to talk about education, and you were just talking about the high schools and the improvements they've made in education. At the same time, you were just in the story in the Globe the other day talking about how you're worried about the high schools. 2 years ago, you talked about having this, reinventing the high schools, and there's still not a plan for reinventing the high schools. Let's talk about Madison Park, which is the city's voc-ed high school. I think in 2014, educators said it was in big trouble. 2 years ago, the state said it was underperforming. Last year, the principal was suspended for reasons we don't know about, and then he resigned in June. So you look at all that and you think, what's going on?
One thing about Madison Park, there's a great life in that school with the young people that go to school there and the teachers, and that school does have stability in leadership for the last 4 years. There was an issue with the principal. We're talking about the headmaster. Before I became mayor, there was 4 leaders there in 4 years. There was a lot of uncertainty in the school. They've made some incremental gains in that school. We've had an increase every year of kids choosing Madison Park School.
I thought the enrollment had plummeted.
No, it
way
plummeted,
down.
but this year it's starting to come back up a bit.
Okay.
So we're making investments in that school as well. It's important to do that. And we look at all of our high schools. We're building the first Dearborn STEM Academy in Roxbury, the first new high school in 22 years in the city of Boston. And we're looking at, rather than just continually throwing money at a situation, we're making changes in those schools. When I spoke with the Globe the other day, they asked me where did I think that, where would be my biggest challenge, if you will, in education, because we talked about all the good things happening. And I said in high schools. I said because we have to continue to create a pathway for our young people so that they graduate and they're on a pathway to success or a pathway to college. And there's some kids here from Brighton High School in the audience here today. And Brighton High School just got moved from a level 3 to level 4. And 44% of the kids in that school, English is not their first language. So when I talked about it, and also talking to the state about changing the way that we mark our schools, because it's not fair for some of our high schools in Boston, because we have a high percentage of kids that English isn't their first language. And by the time they learn English and get to a proficient way of speaking English, the MCAS test has already gone by them, or the POC test has gone by them. So there's some adjustments that have to be made both in a city level and on the state level.
As mayor, I will fully fund the Boston Public Schools. This mayor, this past year alone, cut $11 million out of 49 schools. In addition, Madison was cut by $455,000 and fell to a level 4 school. We need to fully fund vocational technical ed, but we need to fully fund all of our schools. What does that mean? That means there should be a nurse in every school. That means there should be art and music in every school. And if we're going to bring companies like Amazon.com, it makes sense to have a kindergarten through 12th grade computer science program that allows every young person to be prepared to run a company like that, not only to deliver the packages that Amazon.com actually has. In addition, we have 4,000 young people who are waiting to get into early education seats. We are underfunding this education system, which is the oldest since 1780. Public education has been a requirement by the state of Massachusetts. We have a lot of work to do here, and under my administration, under a Jackson administration, we will fully fund and support these schools. The issue also is that Mayor Walsh, when people have been critical of the funding, he just simply brushes them aside, and this is what was told to young people, that they were misinformed. In addition, I will democratize the education system. I will create an amazing school committee that actually is democratically elected and not appointed by the mayor. The mayorship of the city of Boston is too strong, and we must democratize how we elect people to the Boston school.
Why shouldn't? I'm sorry, Margery. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you about the teacher's contract that the mayor just signed. It was a 2-year deal, gave teachers a raise, and no reform. And you said it was not good enough for the teachers. At the same time, you have $8 million a year going to these surplus teachers who were not assigned to a classroom, and that's a lot of money for people that are not assigned even for 2 years. So you want to do all these things, Councilor Jackson, but it sounds like you're pro-spending, not big on reform. So what kind of concessions do you think are fair to get from the teachers to be able to fund and do the reforms that are needed?
Well, first, the surplus teachers that you're talking about, that's a policy decision by Mayor Walsh and his administration. They enacted that policy decision that costs between $8 to $13 million a year.
Should they be eliminated?
Well, they should be in the classrooms. And principals, if in this case, those teachers should be in their own classroom, and if they are not doing their job, then they should not be in the classroom.
What does that
but they're not chosen.
Excuse me, does not in the classroom mean released, no longer working for the city?
Understand, it is my feeling about teachers, and I've had this conversation with teachers, that the people who should be most angry about a teacher who is underperforming are other teachers. And so there are people in that SPC pool, which is what it's called, that are former teachers of the year. Right? So this is not a pool of individuals who are not talented. We have a lot of work to do. But I also do want to note this is also an appointed school committee. So all of the decisions that you're talking about are really at the hands of Mayor Walsh. I will change that appointed school committee to an elected school committee and democratize it.
Let him respond.
There was a lot said here, so I need like a
couple of things,
couple
yes.
seconds. 2013, the school budget was $938 million. It's $1.1 billion. Over the last 4 years, we've made an increase of $154 million in the school budget. We've increased special education funding by 21%. This year in the budget, we put in a line item for $16 million in that line item for level 3 schools, because one of the problems was our level 3 schools weren't getting additional money to be able to kind of get out of that where they're in level 3, either go to level 4 or level 2. We gave them additional $16 million in that area, so that's important. We were also working, the money follows the child. So when you have some of these schools in the city of Boston, our grammar schools, the money follows the child. So that means if they're in one school this year and they go to another school, the money goes with the child. The money doesn't stay in a school that's losing kids. But what we did do, we backfilled that level 3 this year. We're putting additional money into those schools. We also have the Build BPS plan. 2/3 of our buildings in the city of Boston are built before World War II. I've heard a little criticism here that we're acting a little slow. We're making $1 billion investment in making sure that we build schools for the 21st century. And on top of that, we built the Dearborn STEM Academy, and we're in the process of doing Boston Arts Academy now. We're going to continue that investment. As far as the school committee goes, the voters of Boston voted twice for an appointed school committee. We've changed the configuration of that school. We have 5 of the 7 board members people of color, and on top of that, we have more diversity there, and we also have more parents on the school department, which weren't there in the past. So I think, we talk about criticizing the schools. We can criticize them all day long, but we've made the investments. In universal pre-kindergarten, we've had 750 new seats in the city of Boston, and I have a plan, if I get help from the legislature, to pay for those by using the money from the Convention Center Fund. That's $16 million that will allow us in the city of Boston to have fully fund, high-quality pre-kindergarten in the city of Boston for every single child in pre-kindergarten. And so I'd love some support from some councilors to help me with that, getting that to the legislature.
We've got to hold you there only because we have a ton of things that people wrote in about that we at least want to touch upon, so we're going to try to pick up the pace. And I want to do it with an umbrella of the issue of transparency or lack of it. Councilor, tonight, and from having looked at your website, you want to fully fund schools, you want to hire more cops, you want to build more affordable housing, you want to double arts funding, you want more cycle tracks, and there's more. I just don't have time.
Yep.
Months ago, you promised a Jackson budget by September.
Yes.
It's now almost November, and it seems to me it's the opposite of transparency, but much more importantly, how can you ask someone to vote for you when they don't know how much your programs are going to cost or how you intend to pay for them?
I will be releasing a budget in the next 48 hours. There are many things that Mayor Walsh, including the BRA issue, that hasn't happened in 3.5 years.
You said it would be out in September. Is that not correct?
Well, yes, and he's done some things that took 3.5 years. So give me a couple more days, and I will be releasing a full budget for FY19 that will actually detail how we will pay for these initiatives. But I will give you a hint that we will add $30 million to the Boston Public Schools. And we will set about fully funding the Boston Public Schools, unlike this mayor in this past year, as well as the past years that he's been here.
Briefly.
In this past budget, we increased the Boston Public Schools spending by $50 million.
I want to stay on transparency
funding, not spending.
with you for a minute. You didn't want to speak to the question of having those 2 high-level people of yours who were indicted on the city payroll, and you said there's due process or something. But in talking about transparency, Mr. Mayor, no one has suggested that you're being investigated at all. I want to be clear right up front. You have refused to say whether or not you appeared before a grand jury.
Again.
And explain, if you can, why are the voters not entitled to know who are going to go to the polls on November 7th? You either were a witness before a grand jury or you were not a witness. Why are they not entitled to know that?
There is an open case that will be heard in January at the United States Supreme Court, United States District Court. That will be heard on both sides, and I'm waiting till that gets finished.
Why?
Because that's what I'm going to do here.
But why is that?
I've answered all the questions. I've answered them. You've asked me on your show probably
you haven't answered this question.
every single time. No, you've asked me the same thing. I'm waiting for this case to be done.
But with all due respect,
let me just go back. I mean, I expect all of my employees in the city of Boston that work with me to work to the highest ideals. And this is a very sad situation, a unfortunate situation. And again, when this case is resolved, we'll see where
But is there a reason you're not telling us now, other than...
There's an open case.
But you lead by example, and this shows that the mayor is unwilling to lead by example. If we're going to talk about transparency, and the mayor won't be transparent about whether or not he has gone to the court, how is he leading other individuals? In addition,
well, you promised a budget a couple of months ago, and we're still waiting for that too.
I would actually say this is a little bit different, Jim, than a budget that's going to be put in. I have a little bit of time before I am put into office. So this is a little bit different here. In addition, Mayor Walsh pulled together an ethics commission that never met. And so we are not dealing with these issues. In my administration, in the first 6 months, everybody will receive ethics training, and we will all be on a level playing field relative to these issues.
Can I respond to that? These are not facts, and I think that they have to be checked a bit here. There is a piece of legislation at the State House on the ethics, waiting for that to go through. And as far as we've had ethics trainings in the city of Boston, and it's the law from day one. So it's the law. It's not something that I can say, well, I'm going to bring ethics training to the city of Boston. It's the law. I have to do it.
Speaking of questions, we had a lot of questions that people wanted us to ask, and one of the other big things besides affordable housing is transportation. Globe just had a story the other day about this. It was a horrible Boston traffic story about the duck boats, they're down at Faneuil Hall, and there's so much traffic they've given up trying to get to Charlestown or to Harvard Square because there's too much traffic. The study last June predicted the sea of brake lights in the Southeast Expressway by 2030. There's going to be 80,000 more vehicles, 14,000 more people on the T, and twice the congestion at Logan Airport. So if we do get Amazon, then we've got 50,000 possible people over the next 10 years. And plus, we're going to put on more cycle tracks. So you think to yourself, in 20 years, we may have to take skateboards or something to work.
No,
Walsh, you know what I'm saying?
We put forth a Go Boston 2030 plan, which had 6,000 Bostonians sit down and talk about what they wanted to see in transportation. And we had Bostonians from all different types of modes of transportation. As far as the MBTA goes, we all know that's mostly run by the state. Yep. But we have to work in our Amazon bid. We connect the red line to the blue line. We work with better connections, and we have to continue to work with the MBTA and push the MBTA, quite honestly, to come up with a plan to make sure we can upgrade the service that's happening. When you look at the service of the MBTA, the red line has pretty 85% service. The blue line has the best 90% service. The green line goes down, I think, to 53% services, and buses are in the 40%. People need to improve the service on the MBTA.
How about the streets?
And we have to encourage people to take public transportation. The second piece of that is we're looking at everything. We're looking at autonomous vehicles to see how autonomous vehicles work. If that truly is the mode of the future, how we get autonomous vehicles. We're looking at right now in Boston we have gridlock. We have the North Washington Street Bridge that's being reconstructed. We have the Northern Ave Bridge that's shut down. These are all things that we have to continue to move forward and create better pathways. We'll have to upgrade our technology in the city of Boston. We have old technology. So when you think about traffic and transportation, I mean, the positive, I guess, is that we have growth of a city and people want to be here. The negative side is, yes, we're concerned about companies not coming here because of traffic. But we're not the only, there's other cities in America trying to battle the same issue, and we're going to continue to think outside the box to make sure that we can move our traffic forward. I just want to say one last thing.
Real quick.
Bikes are modes of the future.
Yeah, but here's the thing about bikes. I know you love bikes, and I know you love bikes, but I think, isn't the ugly truth here that when you think about it, the streets in Boston are two now? You get bikes, you get cars, you get trolley trains,
not the whole city. In certain areas you do. There's no question about it, because it's an old city built with cow paths, and we know that. We've heard that a million times. But there are some areas like what we're doing right now in Brighton with bicycle tracks out there. We're looking at Connect to Historic Boston. We're looking at bicycle tracks there, and we're looking at when we changed the Boston Planning and Development Agency. We actually talked about we put planning first. So when people talk about getting rid of it, we're putting planning first, because what hasn't happened in this city over the last 40 years is as we've built up the city, we haven't really built into it the transportation system around it.
So, okay.
Yes.
So first,
I know you like bikes.
Well, no, but the issue is that in this administration we spend.
Do you have a bike?
I do have a bike. In this administration, we spend $5 a year per person on bike infrastructure. In New York, they spend $15, and in San Francisco, they spend $75. In the city of Boston, no one should die riding a bike, and that's a critical component. And we are not investing enough in that critical infrastructure. In addition, the MBTA, we need to leverage the fact that we're spending about $87 million a year from the city of Boston's budget on the T. We should have a real shoulder into this as a real disparity issue. If you live in Mattapan, you have a huge disparity issue relative to transportation, and this should be at the fore. In addition, this is the reason why I would get rid of the BRA. We don't plan in Boston. We develop, but we don't plan. And the reason why we have gridlock is we're putting up thousands of units, and we're not actually connecting those units to the infrastructure needed and the infrastructure upgrades needed to actually deal with the fact that we're bringing more people in. In addition, I went to Mexico City, pretty big city, and they have something called bus rapid transit, which we could put forward in the city of Boston. And it's a pretty old city, has some small streets in Mexico City, and they were able to put forward a bus rapid transit system, and it's something that we should look at in the city of Boston.
You know, one last thing on transportation, late night service, 2 pilots, both the pilots have been canned. You want to make sure that millennials want to come here, they want to stay out late. Low-wage workers have no way to get home.
It was a mistake to get rid of that.
So what are you going to do about it?
I think we pushed the MBTA to keep the service. I mean, we're also pushing the MBTA to keep the ride service for our seniors. So I think it's important that we continue to work with them and push them in the cases. I'm hopeful that the new general manager, now that they seem to have had their financial issues resolved, now they can talk about moving forward. That's something that has to happen.
You've talked 2 more minutes than you have, so you have a little bit extra time. You want to speak to late night service?
No, I think late night service is absolutely critical, and we would take a regional approach. I think you can work with other mayors along the lines to ensure that we are putting the pressure that we need to on the MBTA.
You know, I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question, but I know it matters to a lot of people. So, quick answer. How long should someone be able to put a refrigerator or a toilet or something in a space in a snowstorm? Look at the smile on your face.
They're not putting refrigerators there.
Well, whatever they're putting there. I'm serious.
Let me just say, we both come from neighborhoods that put something in the face.
Yes. How long? I'm serious.
Depending on the snow, 48 hours usually. When you get a little flake of snow, there's no saving spots. Before it snows, there's no saving spots. We're talking about if you get 6 inches of snow, you should be able to save your spot 48 hours because you put some work into it.
How about you? You agree on something?
I agree. Yes, we do agree on something. I agree with 48 hours. And as noted, we have had storm after storm after storm. Yeah. I think it does need to change a little bit if there's 5 storms in a row.
But the South End did a pilot program, and they're still in it. No space savers, and it's working. So we're watching what's happening there and seeing if other cities are willing to do this.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
I was going to ask a quick quality of life issue. Sure. You hear this all the time in Boston when you have little kids, you get down to the swan boats in the summertime, and you go to see those little make way for duckling statues, and you're with your kids, and there's no bathrooms. I know we had those bathrooms there for a while that weren't working, and it was a big problem. But why can't we have safe, monitored bathrooms somewhere near the public garden?
If you can.
Well, I think we're going to make a $28 million investment in Boston Common and Franklin Park, and in those plans, as we redesign and redo Boston Common and Franklin Park, we'll be able to make some investments. Some of the money from both of those projects are going to be put into a fund that's going to give off interest, that they're going to hire permanent staff there dedicated to
the bathrooms. How about you, Councilor?
Well, so first off, that money comes from a shady deal, which is the Winthrop Square garage. And yes, we do need to deal with those issues, but we also need to deal with the issue of homelessness in the city of Boston. And that is a burning issue that Mayor Walsh has made worse. He closed the Long Island shelter, and actually tore down the Long Island Bridge, and we are now still at a deficit. And if you don't need to ask me, you just need to simply go to Mass Ave and Melnia Cass. And we have not discussed this issue, and I think it's critical that we discuss how we deal with the issue of homelessness. That's why that issue of vouchers is so critical, because we now have more homeless folks in the city. In addition, even in the Boston Public Schools, there are 4,000 homeless students currently attending the Boston Public Schools that we know of. And we need a mayor who's going to roll his sleeves up, not build fences, but build bridges and reconnect the Long Island.
I just want to ask you real quick about Long Island, though. You talked about how we should have a boat to go out there to Long Island to get people back there. Were you serious about that?
It's a new technology.
Yeah, I know. Were you serious about that? Because we're not going to have a bridge, apparently.
No,
so should we have people go out there in a boat?
And Mayor Walsh said that he would build a new bridge, and has not built a new bridge. And it's interesting. We can pull together a plan for Amazon in a month and a half, but we can't pull together a plan for homeless individuals and individuals individuals
We
who
only
are
have 2.5
suffering from
minutes left.
addiction.
Homelessness.
In the city of Boston in the last 3 years, we've housed 1,200 chronically homeless people in an apartment in the city of Boston. That's 2,300 years of homelessness that no longer is on the streets of Boston. And also, when the bridge closed, when the bridge was open, what we used to do in the city of Boston, or before I was the mayor, what we used to do is take homeless people off the streets and ship them out to Long Island and not deal with the issue. We're actually dealing with the issue. Someday there'll be a bridge built back to Long Island, but you know what's not going to go back out there? The homeless people. Because we shouldn't be hiding homeless people. What we should be doing is working to get them a home so they can live in a home and put the supports around them. And that's what my administration has done. And the council knows this. The council knows as well what my administration has done with homelessness and with addiction over the last 3.5 years.
And what I do know is that you've walked away from funding Project SOAR, Project Safe Harbor. One of those programs is for HIV positive individuals who have addiction issues. And I've actually had individuals in my office who were part of that program, one of them who had a job and no longer has a job because of those changes. In addition, it cost $20 million to tear the bridge down. How much affordable housing could we have built with building affordable housing versus a brand new bridge?
The bridge was crumbling into the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay, we're going to end on an up note, gentlemen, whether you want to or not. You're going to start by telling me the best thing he's done in the last 4 years, and you can't say he's been good to his mother. And you're going to do the exact same thing, and you can't say that about him.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, I knew you were. That's why I said it. You have 30, I'm serious. What's the best thing he's done as mayor? 30 seconds, Councilor.
The best thing that Mayor Walsh has done. Wow. I think that Mayor Walsh has tried to deal with some of the issues around opioids. I don't think he has been necessarily all successful in that space, but I do believe that he has actually made an attempt to deal with this.
That's the best thing he's done. What's the best thing he's done?
That wasn't really a real
rousing
best thing I did.
No, it was not. What's the best thing he's done? Quickly, please.
I think one of the best things the councilor has with him as a person is he cares about our kids in our city. You know, we might disagree on certain things, but he cares passionately about the kids. You know, wherever he's given a speech in the last 4 years, before he was running for mayor of Boston, that always came up in conversation. And you got to love that. I mean, you got to love that we have public servants in our city that actually care about kids. We might not agree on everything, but the bottom line is we care about those kids that are right there.
On that note, gentlemen, that is it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks to candidates Councilor Jackson and Mayor Walsh for participating. And now you can thank them too. Please do that. Join me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, everybody, Election Day is Tuesday, November 7th.
That's right. He's Tim Braude. I'm Margery Eagan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.